Have you ever watched the wind carry something precious and not return it? Have you felt the hush that follows when the land has taken something it will never give back? In the high regions of the Himalayas, where the air is thin and the sky seems close enough to press a palm against, there lives a silence older than language. Not the silence of absence, but of reverence. The kind that kneels without being asked. This is where the vultures circle like slow-turning prayers, and the stones do not move, because they remember too much. There is a village not found on any map, cradled in a valley hidden between veils of snow. The villagers do not speak often, for they believe that words wear thin if used too much. And when the time comes for a body to return to the sky, it is not met with sorrow, but with preparation. For to die in these lands is not to vanish, but to offer oneself to the mountain, to the birds, to the endless breath that is the wind. Dorje, the old mystic, had known his end was near. He had seen it in the smoke from his morning butter lamp, the way it curled not upward, but sideways, toward the sky gap between two crags, a path only spirits take. He had no fear, only a strange kind of stillness, like that which settles on the lake before the storm arrives, not with rage, but with inevitability. He had lived long. No one knew how long, not even Dorje. His face had become the face of the valley, lined, wind-chiseled, half-covered in snowflake brows and beard. He spoke rarely, laughed never, and yet the children trusted him. He could whisper to a fire and make it burn bluer. He could hum to a frightened yak and still its trembling. So when Dorje announced, one grey morning, "It is time for me to climb the rock," none argued. They knew what he meant, and in this village, when one climbs the rock, they do not come down. The rock was not just a stone. It was the charnel stone, flat as a table and colder than truth. Here, the bodies were prepared, anointed with barley flour, placed facing east toward the rising. And when the birds came, great, solemn lammergeiers with wings like dark sails, they were not shooed away. They were invited. Dorje, however, had one final request. Not a possession, not a favor, a song. He called for Chim, a young nun who had once lived in silence for 7 years. Her voice, when she did speak, was low and slow, like glacier melt over stones. To her, Dorje whispered the tune. No words, only breath sounds rising and falling, like prayer wheels turning in the wind. "You must sing this when they lift me," he said. And she nodded, though tears slipped down her cheeks, freezing before they fell. The village gathered on the appointed morning, wrapped in red and ochre shawls, incense smouldering in little bowls carried on flat palms. Dorje lay already upon the rock, eyes closed, lips parted in something that may have been a smile. It had snowed during the night, a soft and sacred snow, and the valley was covered in hush. Chime began to sing. It was not a melody one could remember. It turned in on itself, like smoke curling against the grain of the wind. The notes seemed to come from within the mountain itself, from somewhere deep, a memory beneath memory. And then the vultures came. They did not rush. They descended in spirals, slow, reverent, as if uncertain they were worthy. Dozens, maybe more, landing not with hunger, but with ancient duty. They say the soul does not leave the body until the wind carries it. They say the vultures are not just birds, but wind incarnate, wings of the breath between worlds. As they began their ritual, one feathered beak, one lifted bone at a time, the villagers did not look away. To turn from the offering would be to turn from life. They stood still, snow melting on brows, hands open. But something strange happened. The birds paused. For the length of 3 breaths, they did not move. And in that stillness, the song deepened. Chime was no longer singing alone. It was as though the rocks beneath the charnel stone hummed in echo. A harmony not made with voice, but with presence. And Dorje, though gone, seemed somehow to grow brighter. Not in light, but in memory. His form faded, and yet he was everywhere. Children would later say they saw him in the clouds, walking, The elders did not dismiss this, they only nodded. The ritual ended, not with silence, but with wind, a great, sweeping gust that lifted incense and shawls and hair, as if taking something unseen skyward. That night, no one spoke. They sat in circles, drinking butter tea, eyes on the hearth, ears turned toward the whisper of flames. Chime did not sleep. She returned alone to the charnel rock, knelt and placed her palm flat on the stone. It was warm, and from the distance, the faintest echo of Dorje's chant curled on the wind, not to be heard, but to be felt in the bones. The snow did not fall again for 13 days, and when it did, it fell upward, or so the children swore. They say the sky took him gently. They say the mountains remember his name. And they say that when the wind sings in a certain key, Dorje is near, walking barefoot through clouds, teaching silence to the stars. But the mists hold another tale. Have you ever stepped into snow so deep it swallowed your footsteps as though you had never been? Have you heard the echo of your own breath vanish into white silence, as if the mountain were listening? There are places where the air itself hides things, not out of cruelty, but out of reverence, where creatures pass not with noise, but with knowing, and where the eyes of the world are not found in the sky, but in the trees, the stones, and the distant, watching dark. The villagers of Kangba had always known of the one who walks. They did not call it by the names found in books, not Yeti, not abominable, number. Here it was simply Dolma Raksha, the silent guardian. The keeper of paths, not taken. It was said that Dolma Raksha only showed itself to the ones who were not seeking, only to those who had no map in their heart, only to those who had forgotten the language of wanting. Tsering was such a boy, born in the cusp of winter with a cry softer than a whisper. Tsering had not spoken a word since. The monks said he had been born with too much silence inside, but his mother, who wrapped him each morning in wool and soft prayers, said he simply listened too deeply to bother speaking. Tsering wandered, not out of mischief, but out of kinship. The cliffs, the cracks, the breath of the wind slipping between narrow stones. These were his playmates. He followed crows as if they were brothers. He placed offerings of salt at the base of old shrines without being taught. But one morning, after a heavy snow, he did not return. The sun passed its midpoint. The horns were sounded. The villagers spread like smoke across the valley, calling his name. But their calls disappeared into the white hush. By nightfall, only his footprints had been found, trailing up into the glacier path, where even the yaks refused to tread. His mother sat by the fire, hands folded, saying no prayers. Some things are too sacred to be begged for, but this is not a tale of grief. It is a tale of the deep. Tsering walked not with fear, but with wonder. The snow did not numb him. It seemed to open his skin to the world. He followed a path he did not know, though it curved like something he remembered from a dream. A spiral carved into an old prayer wheel. The wind guided him. It pushed against him when he strayed. It warmed his face when he paused, and at last it led him to a cleft in the rocks, half hidden by hanging ice. Inside, warmth, darkness, and something else. There were handprints on the walls, dozens, hundreds, some small, some long-fingered, some impossible to name, but each pressed with intention, as if each soul had left not just shape, but memory. Tsering pressed his own palm against the rock. It fit. A sound rose. Not a growl, not a word. A breath. The kind of breath taken just before saying something sacred. From the far end of the cave, something moved. Large, slow, gentle. The figure that stepped into the faint light was tall, taller than any man. Its hair was thick, snow-colored with hints of rust. Its eyes were not wild, they were ancient. Tsering did not run. He knelt. The creature watched, then moved closer, and when it exhaled, the boy felt a warmth that was not of body, but of knowing. They sat together for hours, perhaps days, though time had slipped into something soft and formless. No words were exchanged, only glances, movements, a rhythm of breath shared between worlds. And then, as simply as it had appeared, the creature stood. It placed a hand, wide, knotted, trembling, on Sering's head. Then it vanished into the shadows. The boy followed his steps backward, as though retracing a story he had just been written into. At dawn, he emerged from the snow line. The village found him at the edge of the barley fields, barefoot, silent, eyes full of sky. His mother held him. He did not speak, but when she looked into his eyes, she wept, because he had brought something back, not a tale, not a name, a presence. In the days that followed, Tsering began to hum, low, strange notes, as if mimicking wind between stones. At first, the monks dismissed it. Then, one evening, an elder rose and said, "That melody, I heard it once, in a cave near the ice falls, before my dreams turned quiet." The villagers began to gather at night, listening to the boy's hums. They swore the wind changed when he sang. That old thing stirred. A foreign man, wrapped in city coats and holding many cameras, came to ask about the Yeti. He was given tea and no answers. He left with nothing but a strange feeling that followed him back down the trail, like a gaze from something high above, hidden in the trees. Tsering never spoke, but his hums turned into chants, and his chants turned into silences deeper than snow. One night, the village dogs howled toward the ridge. The villagers looked and saw nothing. But Tsering turned his face toward the stars and smiled. And they say, a tall shape walked along the horizon, vanishing behind prayer flags that moved with no wind. Was it a creature? A god? Or was it the part of us we buried, the one that remembers how to listen? The snows would fall again, and the prince would vanish. But beneath the prayer stones, something remains. And if you press your hand to the earth, just above the cave line, you might feel it. A pulse, a memory, a breath not your own. And further still, there is one more story. Have you ever stared into a mirror and seen not your face, but a memory? Not a reflection, but something behind the glass, older than your eyes, deeper than your breath. High in the Himalayas, there is a cave that sees but does not show. A place hidden not by snow, but by silence. No trail leads there. No map marks it. Only the forgotten are called. Once a year, when the sky is neither blue nor grey, but a shade that has no name, the oracle awakens. There is no one who knows if the oracle is a person, a spirit, or simply the mountain itself dreaming in stone. But the stories say the oracle never speaks. It only offers a mirror, and in the mirror, something is revealed. Not what you want, not what you fear, but what you've tried to forget. Choden was only 16 when she climbed. She had no father. Her mother had vanished years ago, walking out into the snows after whispering, "When the stars change, follow me." No one spoke of her again. In the village, vanishing was considered sacred. To disappear was not to be lost, but to be claimed by something older. Choden had waited, watching the stars every night. They did not change. Not until that one evening, when they flickered like a lantern held, underwater. She knew then. The time had come. She said no goodbyes. She braided her hair with black thread and wrapped her mother's stone, a round pebble the size of a thumb, in red silk. Then she climbed. The mountain was not cruel, only quiet. Snow fell, not in flurries, but in small hushes, like the breath of someone sleeping deeply. Birds did not sing. Even the wind seemed to hold its voice. Choden walked for 3 days. No trail, only instinct. Or perhaps the stone guided her. Its weight in her pocket was soft, but steady, like a heartbeat. And at last, she found it. A narrow slit between 2 rocks, veiled with hanging moss and frost. The entrance was not lit, but it glowed, faintly, like memory. Inside, the cave was warm, warmer than it should have been. The air smelled of cedar, old incense, and the faint scent of rain on dust. There was no one there, only a small mirror, polished obsidian, resting on a stone ledge. It did not reflect her face, only shadow. But when she stepped forward, when she knelt and placed the silk-wrapped stone before it, the mirror changed. It showed her mother, not as she was when she left, but as a child singing to a flame. Then again, older, dancing in moonlight with a crown of smoke. And then, the day she vanished, stepping barefoot into snow, smiling with a sorrow that did not ache, but welcomed. And then, a face turned toward Choden, eyes that were hers, and a voice, not sound, but understanding. You are not alone. Choden did not cry. She placed her hand on the mirror, and the surface rippled like water. The cave shivered. A breeze passed through, where from, no one could say. But in it, her mother's scent, juniper, milk tea, and ash. Then silence again, but not emptiness, fullness, a silence that held her, like arms. Choden rose. The mirror was blank once more, but the red silk now bore a symbol burned into it, a spiral within a spiral. The mark of the vanished. She left the cave. The sky had cleared. The stars blinked gently, as if pleased. When she returned to the village, no one asked where she had gone. They only noticed her walk had changed, no longer careful, but certain. At night, she would sit by the fire and wrap red thread around small stones. Children would bring her pebbles, hoping they too might be wrapped. Some said she had become the next oracle. Others said the cave had chosen her. But Choden said nothing. She only listened. And sometimes, when the wind grew still and the stars blinked slowly, she would press the spiral-marked silk to her chest and whisper, "I see you, Amma." And far above, behind the veil of the cave, the mirror waited for the next forgotten child to remember their way home. Was the oracle ever real? Or was the mountain always the mirror? But listen, there is yet another name whispered in the wind. Have you ever listened to the wind and felt that it was writing something you could almost read? Have you ever watched smoke rise, not in chaos, but in patterns, spirals, loops, slow breaths of invisible memory? There are monasteries built not of stone, but of silence, walls that breathe, floors that hum, ceilings where clouds rest their bellies before rising again. And in such a place, high on the edge of forgetting, there is a scroll that no one can read. It is kept in the monastery of Draktsang Ling, the cliff of the hidden voice, perched on the sheer face of a mountain, where only goats and ghosts find footing. It clings to the edge of the world. Built with prayer, not nails. Built with songs, not blueprints. The wind there is not a visitor. It is a monk, ancient and always whispering. Within the stone walls of Draktsang Ling, in a chamber lit only by the flicker of yak butter lamps, there lies a scroll made of paper so thin it breathes. The ink has long faded, the characters smudged into dust. And yet, every morning, when the incense is lit, the monks say the smoke writes above it, fleeting messages formed in mid-air. No one has understood the smoke. Many tried. Elders watched for decades. Scholars came from distant valleys, all left with the same answer. Nothing remains. But the scroll stayed. So did the smoke. And then, one day, a monk arrived. Not young, not old. A wanderer named Pema. He had no lineage, no teacher, no past he spoke of. Only silence in his step and sorrow in his eyes. He had been exiled, so the whispers said. Not for a crime, not for heresy, but for asking a question no one wished to answer. The abbot of Draktsang Ling took him in, not because he understood him, but because the wind that night had changed direction. Pema did not ask to read the scroll. He asked to sit beside it. And so, each morning, as incense was lit and chants were sung, He sat in stillness, eyes not on the parchment, but on the air above it. Days passed, then weeks. The smoke rose, curled, vanished. He said nothing. But then, on the 13th morning, the smoke did not vanish. It lingered, just for a moment, and formed a shape. Not a letter, not a word, a memory. A woman walking backward into fire, holding a lotus in her teeth. Then a child born from a river's breath. Then a crow carrying a scroll in its claws, dropping it into an empty cup. Pema smiled. He did not write anything down. He simply bowed. The monks noticed. They began to gather quietly behind him each morning, watching. More shapes came. A man whose shadow detached and walked another path. A drum beating beneath the earth. A sun with 3 faces, one weeping, one laughing, one silent. Each morning, a new breath of smoke, a new fragment of something no tongue could name. Pema never explained. He only listened. And one night, the abbot approached him, saying, "You are reading it, aren't you?" Pema answered, "No." I am remembering. The abbot, trembling, asked, "Then what is it that the scroll speaks of?" And Pema replied, "Stories that have not happened yet." After that, the chamber was no longer silent. Chants were hummed not from books, but from the heart. The incense was no longer burned, it was breathed like song, and the wind began to enter the room differently, not as a guest, but as a voice. One evening, as twilight bent over the mountains like a shawl of shadows, Pema placed his hand on the scroll, and it turned warm. The ink, they say, rose from the parchment like steam from spring water. It danced, and then, only once, it spelled out a single phrase in the air. The one who listens becomes the one who is heard. The next morning, Pema was gone. No footprints, no message, only his robe, folded and placed where the scroll had rested. And the scroll, it too was gone. But the smoke remained. Each dawn, it still rises. Sometimes it forms shapes, sometimes only breath. But the monks do not try to understand it anymore. They simply sit and listen. And the wind, oh the wind, seems pleased. Was the message ever in the ink? Or was it always in the silence between words? And deeper still, the veil parts once more. Have you ever touched a stone and felt it hum beneath your fingers? Not with music, but with memory. Not with sound, but with a heartbeat. There are stones in the world that carry stories, forgotten by mouths, but held tightly by earth and time. In the ruins of an ancient temple, buried beneath moss and shadows, such a stone waits. The temple was once a place of light and prayer, a sanctuary carved into the mountains where monks and pilgrims came to whisper to the gods and listen for answers hidden in the wind. But time had long since folded its hands over the temple, and the walls had fallen, leaving only fragments, silent as stone. Lamo was blind, not by birth, but by sorrow. She had lost her sight to grief, the grief of a mother who watched her child drift away like smoke on the wind. But with her eyes closed, she saw more than most. She heard the whisper of leaves, the breath of the earth, and the silent songs of stones. Drawn by dreams woven from ash and moonlight, Lamo returned to the ruins. The villagers warned her not to go, saying the place was cursed, that it held the sorrow of centuries. But she moved like a spirit, stepping through broken pillars and tangled roots, guided by something no one else could see. At the center of the temple's remains, she found it, a single stone, dark and smooth, unlike any other. No moss, no cracks. It was as if the stone had been waiting, keeping itself safe beneath the weight of loss. Lamo knelt and placed her hands upon it. The stone pulsed beneath her palms, slow and steady, like a lullaby sung in a language forgotten by all but the earth. She closed her eyes, and the humming grew louder, not in her ears, but in her bones. She heard a voice, not words, but a melody, a lullaby her grandmother had sung long before Lamo was born. a song of rivers and stars, of ancient trees and children lost to the night. She hummed back, and the stone sang with her. The ruins trembled softly, as if waking from a long sleep. For hours, Lamo sat there, hands pressed to the stone, until the stars spilled across the sky like tears. The village waited in silence, unsure if she would return or become part of the temple's sorrow. When she finally rose, her face was serene. She carried no words, only the song. From that night on, the villagers noticed changes. The nights seemed less cold. The earth breathed deeper. And sometimes, when the wind was just right, the stone's song could be heard. A faint, humming echo carried across the valley. Lhamo shared nothing of the stone's secret, but the villagers who visited the ruins often left with lighter hearts. They say the stone holds the memory of all who prayed there, all who wept there, all who dreamed beneath the silent sky. Is it grief? Is it hope? Or is it the land itself, remembering how to sing? But still, the mountain breathes one last whisper. Have you ever woken to a world transformed, silent, white, and unrecognizable? A place where even the wind seems to hold its breath, as if waiting for a secret to unfold. In a summer when snow should have been only memory, a village awoke beneath a blanket that had no reason to fall. No clouds grayed the sky, no storms whispered through the pines. Just snow, soft, endless, and impossible. The village was nestled among rolling hills where barley fields stretched like golden waves beneath the sun. The people were farmers, simple and steady, bound to the rhythm of earth and sky. They knew the seasons well, when to plant, when to reap, when to rest beneath the moon's watchful eye. But this morning, everything was different. Rinzin was the youngest nun of the nearby monastery. She had come as a child, seeking shelter from a storm that had shattered her family. Now, she was the keeper of small prayers, of whispered blessings carried on the wind. But even she was unprepared for the snow that fell without warning or reason. At dawn, Rinzin stepped outside and saw the world reborn in white. She reached down, letting flakes settle on her palm. They melted into beads of water, cool as silence. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. It was as if the snow held a memory, one that reached into the folds of time and stirred something deep within her. That day, the village gathered in confusion. Some whispered of curses, others spoke of signs from the gods. But Rinzin felt something else. She followed a trail in the snow, footprints not made by human or beast. They led her to a circle of empty robes, folded carefully and still warm. No body, only absence. Rinzin knelt and touched the robes. A shiver ran through her, a message not spoken, but felt. The days that followed were quiet, save for Rinzin's whispers. She began to see visions in the flakes, images flickering like stars behind closed lids. Paths not taken, voices not heard, lives unspoken. She shared these visions with the villagers who listened in wonder and fear. They called it a gift, a reminder. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Rinzin stood among the barley, the snow melting at her feet. She raised her hands to the sky and whispered, "The snow is not a curse. It is memory returned to form." The village watched as the first thaw began. The snow melted upward, carried away not by sun, but by breath. Rinzin smiled. She knew the snow was not just water or ice. It was the past itself, folding back to visit the present. The villagers began to speak softly of the snow that fell from nowhere, of the footsteps that led to nothing, of the empty robes warmed by an unseen fire. And Rinzin, the youngest nun, became a keeper of stories not written, but lived. Was it the past that visited? Or was it the soul's way of showing itself one final time? Let us now turn to the final echo. Have you ever stood in a place so quiet that your heartbeat became the only sound? Where even the mountains seemed to hush their breath, listening for something older than stone? There is such a place, far beyond the last path, beyond even the stories told in whispers. A place that appears only when called, not by voice, but by longing. They say it is where the mountain speaks, if you know how to listen, and so they call it the oracle beneath the wind. It is said the oracle is not a being, but a moment when the veil between breath and silence lifts, and you see, not with your eyes, but with the marrow of your memory, not the future nor the past, but what always was. Long ago, there lived an old hermit named Dorje. He had wandered the high passes for 60 winters, speaking to the stones and drinking snowmelt from glacial cups. He was a man who knew how to hear silence. Each morning he would greet the wind as a companion, not a force, and each night he would fall asleep, counting stars not by number, but by feeling. One twilight, as the mist coiled low around the cliffs and the wind trembled like a prayer half-spoken, Dorje heard something strange. A voice not outside him, but rising from within the breath of the mountain itself. "Come," it said, though it used no word. He followed. He left behind his walking stick and go-robe. He left behind food and fire. He walked with nothing but memory and the hush between thoughts. For 3 days he wandered, not forward, not upward, just inward. And then, beneath a stone shaped like an eye, he found a cave that should not have been there. No frost rimmed its edges, no echo greeted his voice. He stepped inside, and the wind stilled. In that place, there was no time, only the oracle. It was not a statue, nor a sage, nor a scroll. It was light, and the shadow it cast. It was voice, and the silence after it. Dorje knelt. The mountain breathed, and so did he. The oracle showed him no visions, no future kings, no falling stars. Only this: a child sleeping in a cradle of snow, a vulture rising above a bone tower, a Yeti walking backward through fog, a woman whispering to snowflakes in midsummer, and finally himself, sitting in silence before a wind that never ended. Dorje opened his eyes. Nothing had changed, except everything. He returned to the world, but not as before. He spoke little. He walked slowly. And he smiled often, though nothing seemed amusing. He became known not as a prophet, but as a presence. People came not for answers, but to remember how to breathe beside him. It is said that when Dorje died, no body was found, only a circle of wind that never touched the ground, and in the center, a single white feather. Some say the oracle called him home. Others say he became part of it. But the story does not end there, for in the valleys of Tibet, when the sky grows too still and the snow forgets to fall, the monks listen to the wind. And sometimes, if your heart is quiet enough, you may hear it too. A hush, a breath, a whisper not meant for ears but for soul. Come, it says. Come and remember what was never forgotten. Come and kneel before the place where silence dreams. Come to the oracle beneath the wind. And so we leave these mountains now, carrying only stories and the warmth of something unspoken. What was it that Dorje saw? Was it the soul of the world itself, or only his own reflection in the stillness? We may never know, but we walk on, step by step, breath by breath, listening.